What's up, everyone? It's Isaac from Hunger Smash Fitness. Going to do another video here today on sleep and risk of injury, especially with young athletes. So, especially with we're looking at the sub 18 for the most part. And I know when I was in my teens, I did not want to sleep at all. And so, looking at this, I'm also looking at myself and knowing that even if someone would have told me that my risk of injury was going to go up if I was sleeping less, I don't know if I would have slept anymore. But also, I wasn't playing competitive sports, so it didn't necessarily carry the same weight. I was doing judo and working on a dairy farm and stuff like that. So I was still active. I was still doing things along those lines, but this is something more just to keep in mind, I guess, when considering how much sleep your teens should be getting. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is called sports-related injuries in young athletes. Is overscheduling a risk factor? So the objective is to examine the association between overscheduling and sports-related overuse and acute injuries in young athletes, and to identify other potential contributing factors to create a working definition for overscheduling injury. So basically they're trying to create a definition of the overscheduling injury and try and figure out where that line is, where that dividing line is. So they did it via survey of 6 university-based sports medicine clinics in North America. They don't say whether it was in the U.S. or Canada, what their specialty was, anything like that. I didn't see any of that without actually buying the full text and all that. But so this is just the free version, the short version of it online. So the athletes that they looked at were aged 6 to 18 years old. And then the participants, so it was their parents' pediatric sports medicine trained physicians. So they had to, since they were under 18, then the parents have to be involved as well. They did it via questionnaires, which isn't my favorite way of doing a study, but especially when you're trying to do when you're trying to look at a lot, a questionnaire can be a great way to do that, especially because here they looked at 360. So yeah, to save on time, it makes more sense, I guess, for that. And then they had different ways that they could measure the outcomes. So here they had the acute, not fatigue related. So acute just means the initial, right after it happened. Overuse, not fatigue related. Acute fatigue related. Overuse, fatigue related. So they're just trying to trying to determine, did it happen that day or did it build up to it, basically. So they did 360 questionnaires. 84 response rate, which is 84% is pretty decent, I would say, with that. Overuse, not fatigue-related injuries were encountered most often. So I think that's promising because they're overuse, not fatigue-related, so they're just doing too much, essentially. And then you can see the others right there. Number of practices within 48 hours before injury was higher for athletes with the OI, which if we look right up here, that's the overuse, not fatigue related, versus those with the AI, which is the acute, not fatigue related. Athlete or parent perception of excessive play training without adequate rest in the days before the injury was related to overuse and fatigue-related injuries. Fatigue-related injuries were related to sleeping 6 hours or less the night before the injury. So this is really interesting that they're drawing the line at 6 hours or less. That seemed to be the bare minimum before your risk of injury dramatically increases. So 6 hours, I know when I was in my teens, oftentimes I was getting 5 or 6 hours every night, except for on the weekends, which I've talked before, where I would crash sometimes and sleep really hard, try and catch up. So this 6 hours or less can be a very dangerous place to be sleeping, that amount of time. So when scheduling youth sporting events, potential activity volume and intensity over any 48-hour period, recovery time between all training and competition bouts, and potential between-day sleep time greater than 7 hours, so equal or greater than 7 hours, should be considered to optimize safety. An overscheduling injury can be defined as an injury related to excessive planned physical activity without adequate time for rest and recovery, including between training sessions, competitions, and consecutive days. So they're saying really be careful. When you're scheduling this out, make sure that the kids are getting at least 7 hours of sleep. And with kids, you have to remember as well that even if you put them in bed for 7 hours, they're probably not going to be sleeping. They're probably going to be whispering and chatting with each other and everything if it's in one of the bunk style rooms. So you want to keep all that sort of stuff in mind as well. But make sure that they're actually sleeping for 7 hours. So that was study number 1. So in study number 2, we're looking at chronic lack of sleep is associated with increased sports injuries in adolescent athletes. So background, much attention has been given to the relationship between various training factors and athletic injuries, but no study has examined the impact of sleep deprivation on injury rates in young athletes. Information about sleep practices was gathered as part of a study designed to correlate various training practices with the risk of injury in adolescent athletes. So informed consent for participation in an online survey of training practices and a review of injury records was obtained from 160 student athletes. So 160, that's still a pretty good number. At a combined middle high school. So grades 7 to 12. And from their parents. So they had a 70% completion rate for the surveys, which is pretty good. And they actually had it split fairly evenly, 54 males and 58 females. The mean average of 15 years old. So, and then the students' responses were then correlated with data obtained from a retrospective review of injury records maintained by the school's athletic department. So they took all the responses from the students and then took the school records and just looked and saw how they matched up. So analysis showed that hours of sleep per night and the grade in school were the best independent predictors of injury. Athletes who slept on average less than 8 hours per night were 1.7 times more likely to have had an injury compared with athletes who slept more than 8 hours per night. So that's really interesting because the other one found that the bare minimum before your risk of injury dramatically goes up was 6 hours. This study is saying that basically you want to be getting 8 hours or more. For each additional grade in school, the athletes were 1.4 times more likely to have had an injury. So, in conclusion, sleep deprivation and increasing grade in school appear to be associated with injuries in an adolescent athletic population. Encouraging young athletes to get optimal amounts of sleep may help protect them against athletic injuries. I'm not quite sure why they're correlating that with increasing grades as well. I'm wondering if maybe because the kids are staying up studying, so if they're very active in sports, and then they're also getting really good grades, they may not be taking the time required to sleep and rest and recovery. So I think that's why they're trying to tie those in together. But that is something that you want to keep in mind. If your kids are really into sports, make sure that they aren't overdoing it, that they are participating, but you want to make sure that they still have that balance in the home life where they're getting the sleep, they're getting the rest, recovery, the downtime to avoid injury. All right, so last one I wanted to look at. Too little sleep and an unhealthy diet could increase the risk of sustaining a new injury in adolescent elite athletes. I thought these were really interesting because these studies, the first one's from 2011, second one's from 2014, and this one's from 2017. So it's really split. Every 3 years, they did a new study and basically found almost the exact same thing. But we'll go ahead and read this study now. So little is known about health variables and if these variables could increase the risk of injuries among adolescent elite athletes. The primary aim was to present overall data on self-perceived stress, nutrition intake, self-esteem, and sleep, as well as gender and age differences on 2 occasions among adolescent elite athletes. So this is all self-perceived as well. So this isn't someone else writing down how the student is doing. This is the student themselves grading them. So a secondary aim was to study these health variables as potential risk factors on injury incidents. A questionnaire was emailed to 340 adolescent elite athletes on 2 occasions during a single school year, autumn semester and spring semester. The results show that during autumn semester, the recommended intake of fruits, vegetables, and fish was not met for 20%, 39%, and 43% of the adolescent elite athletes, respectively. The recommended amount of sleep during weekdays was not obtained by 19%. Multiple logistic regression showed that athletes sleeping more than 8 hours of sleep during workdays reduced the odds of injury with 61%, and athletes reaching the recommended nutrition intake reduced the odds 64%. Our findings suggest that nutrition intake and sleep volume are of importance in understanding injury incidents. So I really liked those 3 studies because I thought that it did a really good job of showing how important the sleep is with everything, and how really getting less than 8 hours of sleep puts you at quite an increased risk of injury. But also not properly scheduling out your day and not monitoring your diet can have a huge impact as well. I think that really goes to show that even if your training is on point, even if you're doing everything possible to get as strong as possible, as fast, as healthy, everything else as possible, you still need, especially your sleep and nutrition. Both of those are extremely vital to succeeding. So I really liked those 3 studies. I hope that this was very insightful for you. And if you have any questions or anything, make sure to comment down below. And as always, please like and subscribe, and let me know what else you'd like to hear about. And I will try and find more interesting studies, more interesting articles to bring videos to you. So thanks, and that's all for today. Just remember to always improve that 1%.